and welcome to San Antonio Heights Community Church online service. My name is Ricky Happ, and I am the church administrator here. We joined this church about a year ago, and folks, I'll tell you, if you have not visited us, you should. Our services are Sunday at 10:15 a.m. We'd love to have you, and for those watching online, thank you. So I'm hoping to take you guys down a journey today that will lead you to see how God works throughout your life. There are times where you could be struggling in your walk. You could be a non-Christian and you're wondering what's missing in your life. I spent first 22 years of my life not walking with Jesus and made a lot of decisions that, frankly, I look back and I'm like, I probably wouldn't make those decisions again. However, there's a beauty in that, in looking back. Looking back reminds me that God was there, even in times where I was not chasing after Him, in times where I was struggling a little bit, or like I said, those first 2 decades of my life where there was no Jesus involved, He was still there working. So hopefully I can give you a picture of what that's done for me, what Jesus has shown me throughout the last 22 years of my life. So I'm going to jump way ahead in my life to 2001. I was 22, 23 years old, and I had a gentleman I worked with. His name was Terry. And Terry, unfortunately, was battling cancer for the second time. And his wife called and was giving us updates at work and letting us know that things were not looking good. And this was a man I hadn't known very long. At that point, I'd only known him for about 2.5 years. But for some reason, even though my life I wasn't forming long-term connections. I wasn't treating people right. My attitude was always negative. So his wife calls us at work one day and she said, Terry's not coming back. They're going to take him off life support. We have to make that decision, and we've done that. We're going to take him off life support. We'll let you know when the service is going to be. So in a matter of, it was weeks. To me, it felt like it was in an instant. I lost a coworker. Something hit me that day, though, when his wife called to say that they were taking him off life support. I was lost. Didn't make sense. I felt like we should be able to control when these things happen, and yet here we are. We can't control any of it. That day after work, I drove to Barnes & Noble, and I bought a Bible. I had grown up. There was a history of church. There was the knowledge of God being the creator, Jesus wanting to be Lord of our lives, but there was no prime example of what that's supposed to look like for me growing up. It wasn't until late in November 98 when I moved to Washington State. I had an aunt and uncle that lived there, and they had at the time, one young daughter, 8 years old around that time. And something felt different about being around them than around other people. So I visit them in August of that year. And in November, I moved back with a week's worth of clothes and I think $100 my mom handed me. I had no money. I hadn't had a job at that point for 4 or 5 months and didn't really have a lot going on in life. So I decided to stay. Well, turns out the day that she went back to work, she found out the warehouse manager had taken his paycheck and left. Didn't come back to work. And so, voila, job. Timing was so interesting to me, but I just brushed it off as, oh, great, a job. Now I can stay. Distance. So back to 2001, there I am driving to Barnes & Noble feeling like, I don't know what I want from life. There's no ambition. There's no drive. What I did know was I was done. I know what I was done with, but I felt done. And so I stood there in Barnes & Noble. The next thing I did was I made a challenge. I made a history of challenges in my life, feeling like I needed to prove someone wrong, that I needed people to see that I was right. There are those around me who say I'm still stubborn, but I'm standing there in Barnes & Noble, and I remembered, back when I was young, 4th or 5th grade, I started playing soccer, and I was not good at all. I had a couple good friends on the team I played on, and they were always patient with me, but there was a couple people on the team that were not very patient. Young kids, and young kids say what young kids say, and they made me feel worse for how bad I was. But I was, like I said, stubborn. So I challenged that, and I worked hard, but looking back, I didn't challenge it to make myself better. I challenged it to prove someone wrong. And then when I was in high school, I had someone tell me that I would fail algebra because I was not very good at math, which I love math now, but maybe that was the kick. However, I took that challenge, and again, looking back, I passed that class so I could prove someone else wrong. So now I'm standing in Barnes and Noble, and I'm having that same feeling of needing to prove someone wrong, same feeling of wanting to challenge someone, and I chose God. I can't tell you that that's a recommended approach for everyone. However, I feel like it was the approach I needed, and I said, Jesus, I can't do this anymore. I can't fight every day. So everyone says you can do it so much better. Let's see you give it a shot. The beautiful thing about Jesus, though, is he doesn't work to prove you wrong. He works to show you who he is. And what he shows you is that he's a loving father. I felt the love of a friend, a teacher, somebody that wanted to not just tell me what to do, but show me and walk with me through it. And people will say that when they give their heart to Jesus, that it's a work. It is. Boy, there are things you got to work on. For me, I can tell you this. There were things that happened in that moment before I even left the shelf. And it was what I just said. I felt loved by a father. I felt loved by a friend and someone who wanted to walk with me through it. I felt peace. I felt less anxious. I felt, even though for 5 or 6 years I was drinking a lot, I felt that the need to turn to that when I was stressed was gone before I even left. I felt a desire that I wanted to know him, and I walked up to the counter to pay for that Bible, and I was all but in tears, holding him back so the person behind the counter didn't see me crying. Now I wish they had, because maybe 20 years ago I could have, in the very moment I told Jesus my heart is his, in that very moment I could have told someone how I felt in an instant. But I've had other opportunities in the past 20 years of my life to share that with people. And now I look back and I think, boy, was God there before and I just didn't see him? And I think back to when I was a kid, I'd go stay at my best friend's house. And there were times his grandparents would come into town, and his grandparents always wanted to go to church when they were in town. And that seemed weird to me. We didn't even go to church and we lived there. But they wanted to go to church even when they were on vacation. So I'm staying at my best friend's house. His grandparents are in town. They're wanting to go to church, and now he's sick. And I realize I don't really think he's sick, but benefit of the doubt, his mom stays home with him, and I go to church with his grandparents. I didn't notice that as a fourth grader, but now I look back and I'm thinking, man, was that Jesus trying to get my attention then? Still in fourth grade, my mom gets in her accident, and she survives that thing. Oh, I missed it. That was a moment. That was a moment for me to recognize there's someone bigger. There's somebody. We have a protector, someone who loves us, and I missed that. And then I look at when I moved to Washington. I spent the first 2.5 years of my life arguing with my aunt and uncle and my cousin, and I don't want to go to church with you. I don't want to go to church with you. You guys go to church. I'm going to go play golf. I wasn't even good at golf, yet I chose to spend my money on that instead of going to church. So I spent a couple years arguing with people and saying, I have to go to church to believe in God. Well, after I started reading the Bible and started digging into what it is Jesus wants to do with my life and how he's protected me over the years, I read James, the book of James, and in James 2:19 says, "You say you have faith, for you believe that there is one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror." So it's kind of a gut check for me. Is that what I want to be? Do I want to be someone who just believes or someone who's following? someone who's chasing after. And for me, it was chase after. That night after I bought the Bible, I went home and I closed the door and I started reading, and I didn't know anything about the Bible. I didn't know what books I should read. I mean, it might be good to start at the beginning. However, that's not always how I work. And so I picked Job, the book of Job, and I'm reading through this thing, and I'm done. I'm in tears reading through it, and just it's crazy how, like, in first day, I'm seeing the beauty of God, of how He is. And then I get to Job 38, and Job 38 says, "Who is this that questions my wisdom with such ignorance? Brace yourself like a man, because I have some questions for you, and you must answer them." Again, gut check. And this is day one of me trying to figure out Jesus. And I'm the one who challenges everything. I'm the one who questions everything. So now I've got this coming back at me, and I'm just undone. And I start to see that God doesn't tell us life's going to be easy. My life was full of hard times. I grew up in a single parent home, like a lot of other people do. I grew up. My sisters and I got along, but we didn't have great relationships as kids. We at times didn't speak to family for different reasons. I saw my dad a couple times a year early on, and then there were years where I didn't see or talk to him very much. And so those were some things I faced as a young kid. And then I got older, and I started seeing that there was a pattern in my family of there was a pattern of drinking, there was a pattern of divorce, of the feeling of separation and abandonment. And these are just facts. These are just things that were there. As a kid, you don't see that. I look back and I think, man, we made it through that somehow. So in the first few years of walking with Jesus, there were many opportunities where I got to see Him in action. I got to see Him work through other people and what He was doing for His kingdom and how He would use people. And it built this mindset into me that it doesn't matter who you are, where you come from, what you've done, God can use you. In 2004 or so, I went on a mission trip, inner city trip to LA to work with the homeless shelters and visit with the homeless people. And we got to hear stories from some of the people who've been living on the streets for years, and just hearing their history, man, we hurt for them. We were working with a youth organization, and we went to this concert. While we were at the concert, I was feeling bad. I was feeling like, man, we're kind of on this trip for us. We're kind of on this trip to what else can we see while we're here in LA, in a town we've never been. And we started losing focus on why we were there, and it was almost a collective thing. And I remember standing in that concert, feeling like God was telling me, you need to say something. You need to step up. And I'm thinking, I'm not the youth pastor. I'm here as a sponsor. I'm here to help make sure we take as many kids home as we brought. And it's just a horrible attitude to have, because I didn't want to take responsibility for the fact that I was losing sight as well. So I tried to shift my focus, and I turned and I started praying for a friend of mine who was one of the other sponsors on the trip. And after the concert was over, we're walking out, and she said, "Hey, I really feel like God's telling me you need to step up and say something." And I'm like, man, like, how does He do it? You know, I'm fighting it every step of the way. I'm not wanting to be the one. And boy, He just kept at it, and just such a loving. He didn't hammer me. He used someone else that was close to me to say, you can do this. And I just stopped, and I'm like, how do you do this? How do you do it? So I did. I stepped up, and I was like, I was patient, which normally I'm not. In those instances, I'm not as patient as I would like to believe. And I said, guys, we're missing it. We're missing the point. We're missing why we're here. We need to get back to focusing on Jesus, back to focusing on why we're on this trip in the first place. And I tell you that we turned that trip around. And I say we, but no, it was Jesus turned that trip around. He used who He needed to get that message across. So then jump ahead a couple years, we were on another mission trip, or going on a mission trip. We hadn't even left yet. And I witnessed the start of something so beautiful and how God works. And that was, we had a gentleman who was been feeling like God wanted him to go on that trip, but all the spots were full. So he wrestled with Jesus a little bit to say, the trip's full, I can't go. And he really felt like God was telling him he needed to go. So we had a meeting one night, and he finally decided he would tell the youth pastor who was leading the trip. He would tell him, hey, I feel like God's been telling me I need to go on this trip. And the youth pastor's like, yeah, man, that'd be great if you went. All the spots are full. And he's like, that's what I told God. And we really try to step in God's way, don't we? I did back in 2004, telling God that I don't need to be the one. My friend had fought a little bit about whether he should go on this trip or not. And that night he told the youth pastor, we found out one of the students wasn't going to be able to go. And so we got to watch him be obedient. We got to watch him get out of God's way. And like that, God just opens the door and says, thank you. Thank you for being faithful. Here's your spot. So now he's not going on the trip. So now he thinks, oh man, I gotta come up with the funds. So he gave his deposit. Turns out somebody else paid the rest of his trip. I don't know who. I don't need to know who, but I ultimately tell you who, and that was somebody else listened to Jesus. Somebody else listened to the Holy Spirit prompting them, whoever it was, to pay for the rest of this guy's trip. So we go on the trip. We get down to Guatemala City, and we get down there and we find out our translators are a no-show. We're not going to have our translators. Guess who ended up translating for us? God knew we were going to need someone. It's crazy. All the things he does that we overlook, the struggles of my family's past, the separations that were there, whether it was fathers not being in the home because my great grandpa died at 32 and left my grandpa and his 6 siblings without their dad. My mom had 7 siblings, and when she was about 12, my grandpa left. However, I decided in 2001 to stop guiding my own path. I decided to give my path to Jesus. So where does that have me today? That has me working for a church part-time. That has my wife and I working for a missions organization out of Southern California. It has us in a place I'd never thought I would be. I never thought I'd have them. If I had a business card, I never thought it'd say church administrator. I never thought I'd have a business card that could say missionary. I look back and I remember I worried about having kids. What would I do to my kids' futures? How would I affect them? How would I shape that? I had to give that to Jesus. I wanted to be the person who provided. I wanted to be the person who cried with them, who laughed with them. I wanted to be the one that was there. And I started to realize, I'm like, but I'm probably going to mess something up. So I had to give them to Jesus. And it was around the time the oldest one was about 4, we started the process for me to adopt them. And it took about a year, about halfway through that. Our attorney hadn't done much with the process, and we were getting frustrated and couldn't get a hold of him. And we found out that he had actually closed his practice and just skipped town. So here I am feeling like we're doing the right thing, and our attorney leaves, skips town. We didn't have the money to start over. A friend of ours called us, and he said, hey, I know what you guys are dealing with the adoption. I want you to call my friend. He's a family attorney, and he's going to help you guys out. And I said, man, we don't have the money. We already paid the money for the first guy who left town. And he's like, that's not what I'm saying. Just call him. He'll work with you. And so we call him, because we wanted this to happen. So we call him, and it turns out our friend had he and his wife had paid the retainer. It's God at work. They listened. They listened to God's prompting because they believed that this was what was best for those kids' future with Jesus, not just their future in general, their future with Jesus. I remember when that was all finalized, I remember thinking, as much as I want to be their dad, I want Jesus to be their father. And in 2011, before either the boys were born, my uncle's dad died. And I loved that man. Known him since I was 11. And he always treated me so well. And I remember when I found out he died, I just cried. I cried for my uncle losing his dad. And Ruth and I decided we'd go on a trip to Ohio for the funeral. So we booked the trip, and I'll spare you a lot of the details, but the God part of this story is we land in Houston for our connecting flight, and when we get to the gate, we couldn't board. Our itinerary somehow had been completely deleted out of the entire system, so we're stuck in Houston at that point. So I go to the counters, and I'm arguing with everyone, Continental, United. I'd argued with you if you came up to me. Somebody was going to fix this, and I was trying to control every step of it. 6.5 hours, I stood there and I argued while Ruth and the girls just sat in the terminal. I kept telling them, this is your fault. You guys need to fix this. You need to pay for our trip, or you need to send us back to Portland. You need to figure this out. And I was just feeling hopeless. I was feeling so lost. And I got to a point where I had nothing left. And I turned around and I took a couple steps away from the counter. I dropped down on my knees and I prayed. And I said, Jesus, I can't do this. And man, it was like I was back in Barnes & Noble 10 years before. I felt God say, I got it. Because in that moment, I not only felt like he wanted to take care of us, he wanted to take care of it, he wanted to love us. I felt like he told me to call someone. So I did, and I called them, and I'm like, hey, here's the situation. I didn't give him even hardly any details. I'm like, this is where we are. We're stuck in the airport. Really basic. And he's like, call my wife. Tell her what you need, and you'll be taken care of. That was God. That was God stepping in and taking care of us. So in a matter of, 10, 15 minutes, got off the phone. We arranged a call with the airlines, called the airlines. The flights were taken care of. And we're staying overnight in Houston so we could fly out the next day. Stand up from kneeling in the airport, and some stranger walks up to me and he's like, man, I've heard what's going on over there. He's like, I don't have much cash on me, but you can have what I have. And some random dude just gives me money to help pay for the hotel that no one was going to cover. And he's like, get some dinner. And so God took care of that. I mean, he just stepped in, and we missed the funeral. But we had a moment with Jesus in that situation where we can now look back at people and say, look again at how God prepares us. Look again at how God takes care of us and provides. So now here we are in Southern California, and we have watched God work this whole thing out. We've watched God get us down here. We've watched him open up doors for us that we never thought would be opened. We've watched him use skills and tools that we learned from prior experiences that we thought were just things we learned. We've watched them apply now in real time. As I try to tie a lot of this together, I believe what I can tell you is I had no identity growing up. My identity was wrapped up in the history of my family. My identity was wrapped up in my friends. My identity was wrapped up in my environment. I started to wrap my identity up in drinking. I wrapped my identity up in treating people bad, not being loving at all, not wanting to build lasting relationships. My identity should be in Jesus, not in that of my friends, my family. My identity should be in who Jesus says I am and who he's created me to be. Let me take you back one more time. 20 years ago, I'm driving down the road, and I had only been walking with Jesus for a year or two at the time. And I hear this guy come on the radio, and he's telling a story about his kids. He said as his kids got older and they would go on trips, he and his wife taught his kids to say, "Where are we now?" I want to ask that we all do that today. We say, "Jesus, where are we now?" I find myself doing that every couple of days. Jesus, where are we? I probably should do it every morning. But I do that every couple of days. Jesus, where are we? Am I missing something? Am I getting in the way of something? Because as I want to do every day, I want to get out of Jesus's way. So if you're sitting there today and you say, "Man, I don't know where I am with Jesus," start with him. He'll tell you. You got to listen and you got to get out of the way, but he'll tell you. Father, as we sit with you today, Jesus, I ask that all of us hear where we are with you in our walk, where we are in our relationship, what it is that's holding us back in any way, if anything is there. Father, that we are open to hearing from the Holy Spirit. And Father, more than anything, Father, remind us how much you love us. Remind us how much you do for us. Jesus, we don't deserve anything you give us, but you willingly died on a cross for us. Jesus, thank you for how you guide us. Thank you for how you want to be the Lord of our lives. Father, thank you for those you put in our lives, you put in our path. Thank you for those people who need to hear your word. And God, let us all live into 1 Peter 3:15. In any moment, be willing to share with those around us what it is you've done for us and where our joy comes from. Father, thank you for how you take care of us. Father, thank you for being our friend. Thank you for being our teacher. Thank you for wanting to be our Father. Jesus, in your glorious name we pray. Amen. As the saying goes, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you for listening. Thank you for letting me be real. Thank you for letting me cry. Thank you for letting me share how God was active in my life. And man, if nothing else, just remember God is always active in yours. Sometimes we just have to get out of the way. Thank you for spending your time this morning. We look forward to seeing you Sundays, 10:15 a.m. God bless and have a great day.